The diner smelled faintly of coffee grounds and rain-soaked asphalt, the way it always did when the morning rush never came. Sunlight pushed through the blinds in thin, dusty slats, glinting off the worn chrome fixtures that once gleamed like silver. The red vinyl booths, faded from decades of elbows and laughter, sat empty now, silent witnesses to better years. Only the hum of the old refrigerator broke the quiet. Sarah Miller stood behind the counter, wiping at a spot that wasn't there. Her hands moved mechanically, more out of habit than purpose. The letter from the bank lay open beside the register, its crisp edges already smudged with coffee stains. She didn't need to read it again. She could recite every word. Final notice, foreclosure effective immediately, property to be vacated by closing time. Her reflection in the napkin dispenser startled her. A woman she barely recognized stared back. Hollow eyes, the faint smudge of exhaustion beneath them, a strand of hair falling loose from her bun. The silver locket at her throat caught the light, a small, steady gleam against the dullness. She touched it unconsciously, fingers tracing the engraved pattern that once comforted her. Tom's last gift. She could still hear him laughing as he fastened it around her neck, telling her it was for luck. Across the room, her daughter Lily sat in the corner booth, legs swinging beneath the table. A stack of crayons lay scattered beside a coloring book, but she wasn't really coloring, just moving the crayons around, arranging them into a rainbow she never quite finished. Every few minutes she looked up, studying her mother's face. Children had a way of knowing when the air changed, when hope began to leak out of a room. "Mommy," Lily said softly, "are we still open?" Sarah forced a smile. "For now, sweetheart." She poured herself a cup of coffee, though she couldn't stomach a sip. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the mug. She had worked here since she was 16, first under her father's watchful eye, then alongside her husband, and finally alone. The diner had survived recessions, storms, and even the new highway that stole half their traffic. But it hadn't survived the slow, suffocating weight of medical bills and interest rates. The bell over the door jingled, a sound that used to make her heart leap with reflexive warmth. Now it just made her shoulders stiffen. Frank Dawson stepped inside, his gray suit damp from the drizzle outside. He removed his hat and gave the room a quick glance, as though already calculating what each piece of it was worth. His face, once familiar from PTA meetings and town fairs, had become unreadable, his eyes dull with the detachment of a man doing his job too long to feel it anymore. "Sarah," he said with the tone of someone addressing a problem, not a person. "You know why I'm here." "I thought I had until tonight." He sighed, setting a folder on the counter. "The bank changed its schedule. They want the property cleared today." Her heart gave a painful twist. "Frank, my daughter, and I live upstairs. I just need a few more days. It's out of my hands." He shuffled papers, avoiding her eyes. She laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "That's what everyone says when they don't want to feel guilty." He flinched but didn't argue. The silence stretched until Lily's small voice broke it. "Mr. Dawson," she said from her booth, "are you taking Mommy's diner away?" Frank hesitated, caught off guard by the child's directness. "It's not like that, sweetheart." Sarah's throat tightened. She turned away, pretending to refill the sugar dispenser so her daughter wouldn't see the tears threatening to spill. Outside, a moving truck pulled up, its tires crunching over wet gravel. The sound hit her like a hammer. She had imagined this moment 100 times, but never believed it would come. She drew in a shaky breath, squared her shoulders, and whispered to herself, "Keep it together, Sarah." The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second echoing through the empty diner like a countdown. Behind her, Lily slid out of the booth and came to her side, slipping her small hand into her mother's. "It's okay, Mommy," she said softly, her voice trembling with the kind of courage only children possess. "We can start over." Sarah looked down at her daughter, the world blurring for a moment. Then she knelt and hugged her tightly, the silver locket pressed between them, cool and unyielding. She didn't know that before the sun set, a stranger would walk through that same door, a man whose arrival would unravel everything she thought she knew about loss, love, and fate. But for now, it was just the two of them, clinging to each other in the quiet hum of a dying dream. The rain had grown heavier by noon, drumming softly against the diner's broad front windows. The open sign flickered stubbornly, one of its red neon letters fading in and out as if undecided whether hope was still allowed in this place. Outside, the gray clouds pressed low over the empty street, the whole town holding its breath. Sarah stood behind the counter, her apron damp from wiping down surfaces she wouldn't own by evening. The men from the bank had finished cataloging equipment and were standing outside smoking, their laughter muted by the glass. They might as well have been laughing at her, at the woman who had spent her life pouring coffee and kindness into the same cracked mugs, only to lose it all to paperwork and fine print. Lily had stopped coloring. She sat on the counter now, swinging her legs, eyes fixed on the door like she was waiting for something. "Mommy," she said, "if someone came in and bought pie, could we keep the diner?" Sarah smiled weakly. "It'd have to be one very expensive slice of pie, honey." At that moment, the bell above the door jingled again. A man stepped inside, and the air seemed to change. He didn't belong here, not in his dark wool coat tailored perfectly to his frame, nor with that faint scent of cedar and rain that followed him in. His hair was dark, swept neatly back, and a few drops of water clung to his shoulders like diamonds. He glanced around the diner slowly, taking it in as though he'd just stepped into a memory he couldn't quite place. "Sorry," Sarah called automatically, her voice weary. "We're closed today." He hesitated. "That's a shame," he said, his voice low and resonant, touched by an accent she couldn't place. "I've been driving for hours. I was hoping for coffee. Maybe a slice of pie if I'm lucky." Sarah sighed, hand on her hip. She should have told him to leave. But something about his tone, polite, calm, unhurried, stopped her. "Coffee I can do," she said finally. "Pie's out. Coffee will do fine." He crossed to a booth near the window, setting down a leather briefcase that looked more expensive than her entire day's earnings. His gaze followed her as she moved behind the counter to pour a fresh cup. When their eyes met, something in his expression softened. Not pity exactly, but recognition. "Long day?" he asked as she brought the mug over. "Long year," she replied, placing it gently in front of him. The man smiled faintly, then wrapped his hands around the cup. "Best kind of coffee is the one that keeps you standing," he said almost to himself. He took a sip and nodded approvingly. "You make it strong." "Strong's cheaper than good," she said with a tired laugh. He looked up sharply, studying her face. "You don't really believe that?" Before she could respond, the bell clattered again. Frank Dawson pushed through the door, his tie loosened, followed by a sheriff's deputy holding a clipboard. The sight made Sarah's stomach twist. "Sarah," Frank began, his tone falsely apologetic, "I'm afraid we need to begin the inventory process now." Sarah's hand tightened around the counter. "You said I had until closing." "I said the bank would try to accommodate that," he corrected. "They've decided otherwise." The deputy moved toward the booths, pulling out a tablet to take photographs. Lily flinched at the click of the camera shutter. "Mommy, what's happening?" she whispered. "Nothing you need to worry about," Sarah murmured, but her voice shook. The stranger set down his cup slowly, his gaze narrowing. "Excuse me," he said, standing. "What exactly is going on here?" Frank turned, blinking in surprise. "Sir, this is a private business matter." "It doesn't look very private," the man said evenly. "It looks like harassment." The deputy frowned. "Who are you, sir?" The stranger's expression didn't change. "Someone who asked a question." Sarah felt her pulse jump. "Please," she said quietly. "I don't need help. This is just the way things are." The man studied her for a moment longer, then looked to Frank. "What's the amount owed?" Frank shifted uncomfortably. "That's confidential." "Not anymore," Sarah said bitterly. $147,000 plus the apartment upstairs." The man raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "And if it were paid in full today?" Frank laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "Sir, that's not how these things work." "I'm not asking how they usually work," the man interrupted softly. "I'm asking if it would settle the debt." The room went utterly still. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Sarah stared at him. "Why would you?" "Because I don't like bullies," he said, his voice cool but controlled. Then to Frank, "Would that clear her record?" "Technically, yes, but then I'll wire it now." Frank's mouth opened, then closed again. The deputy looked bewildered. Sarah's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Stop! No, you can't just walk in here and pay for my life." The man turned toward her, his gaze steady. "Who said anything about charity?" "Consider it." An investment in what? She demanded. In you, he said simply. Lily climbed off her seat, clutching her stuffed bear. Are you a prince? She asked shyly. Because in my stories, princes always save people. The man crouched down, meeting her eyes. No, sweetheart, he said with a small smile. Just someone who doesn't like seeing good people fall. The tension in the room felt electric. Frank stammered something about procedure, but the stranger was already pulling out his phone, tapping the screen with the quiet precision of someone used to making the world move at his command. Within minutes, Frank's own phone buzzed. He stared at it, color draining from his face. It cleared, he muttered. The full amount. Sarah stood frozen. Who are you? She whispered. The man straightened, slipping his phone into his coat pocket. James Carson, he said. But names don't matter much, do they? Then, almost as an afterthought, his gaze flicked to the silver locket around her neck, and his confident expression faltered for the first time. He stared at it, eyes darkening with something unreadable. Where did you get that? He asked quietly. Sarah's hand flew protectively to the pendant. It was my husband's gift, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Why? James looked like he'd seen a ghost. Because, he said slowly, his voice trembling for just a second, my mother had one exactly like it. And for the first time that day, Sarah forgot the foreclosure, the bank, and even her fear, because in that moment, under the hum of the diner lights and the endless rain, she realized something far more unsettling had just begun. The rain slowed to a whisper outside, a gray hush settling over Main Street as if the whole town were listening. Inside the diner, time itself seemed to stall. The only sound came from the clock above the counter, each tick echoing like a heartbeat in Sarah's ears. James Carson still stood by the booth, his gaze locked on the silver locket around her throat. Whatever mask of composure he usually wore had cracked. A hint of disbelief flickered behind his eyes, quickly followed by something darker. Grief or maybe fear. Sarah touched the locket again, uncertain. You're mistaken, she said quietly. This isn't valuable, just sentimental. Sentimental things, he murmured, tend to be the hardest to lose. Frank Dawson cleared his throat awkwardly from the doorway, already eager to escape the strangeness that had settled over the room. Well, if the payment's cleared, then suppose the matter's resolved. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Congratulations, Sarah. Sarah barely heard him. Her focus remained on the stranger who had just rewritten her fate with a few taps on a phone. Gratitude warred with suspicion inside her. She wanted to thank him, but part of her wondered what kind of man spent nearly $200,000 on a stranger's diner. Lily tugged on her mother's apron. Mommy, can we make him pie now? The innocence in her voice broke the tension for a moment. James smiled faintly, though his eyes never left Sarah's. Only if your mom wants to. Sarah hesitated. We don't have much left, but I can manage a slice. She moved toward the kitchen, glad for the excuse to step away, her mind spinning. Behind her, James sat down again, turning the locket's image over and over in his mind. The pattern etched into its silver surface, the curling vines, the tiny rose at the center. He knew it. His mother's locket had been identical. He remembered her fingers brushing it when she told him bedtime stories, her voice soft with some unspoken sorrow. He looked toward the door, half tempted to leave before the ghosts of memory grew any louder. But something about Sarah, her quiet resilience, the way she straightened her shoulders even in defeat, held him there. A few minutes later, she returned with a single slice of pie on a chipped white plate. It's not fresh, she said, setting it before him. He took a bite anyway. It's perfect. Her expression softened despite herself. You don't have to pretend to like it. I don't pretend, he said. Not anymore. She sat opposite him, folding her hands. You said this was a business proposition. What kind of business are you in, Mr. Carson? He hesitated, swirling the coffee in his cup. Investments. Mostly in technology. Some in people. People? He smiled faintly. The best returns come from those. Sarah frowned. So you're here to buy my diner? Not buy, he said. Restore. There's a difference, she stared at him. Why? You could invest in a dozen profitable things, and this place isn't one of them. Maybe profit isn't the point. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was returning, slow and deliberate. Lily, perched at the counter, was humming softly to herself. James watched her for a moment, then turned back to Sarah. How old is she? 8, going on 18. She looks like you. Sarah smiled sadly. Everyone says she looks like her father. What happened to him? The question slipped out before James could stop it. Sarah's fingers tightened around her cup. Cancer, she said simply. 2 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I, she whispered. Silence stretched between them again. The smell of coffee mingled with rain. Finally, Sarah said, You keep looking at my necklace. Why? James leaned back. Because I think I've seen it before. My mother had one like it, a twin, almost. I never knew where she got it. She died when I was a teenager. Sarah blinked. That's odd. Maybe coincidence, he said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. Maybe not. The diner lights flickered as lightning flashed outside. For an instant, both of their faces were thrown into stark relief. The wary mother, the haunted millionaire, bound by a glint of silver, neither could explain. The power cut out completely. Lily yelped. Mommy, it's okay, sweetheart. Sarah hurried to the counter, lighting the old lantern she kept for storms. Its yellow glow filled the diner with trembling light. James stood near the window, looking out at the deserted street. You should close up for the night, he said quietly. It's going to get worse, Sarah nodded. That's the plan. But as she turned the sign to closed, a sleek black car rolled slowly past the window and stopped across the street. Its headlights cut through the rain, aimed directly at the diner. James's expression hardened. That's not one of yours, is it? She shook her head. No one comes out here this late. A man stepped out of the car, umbrella in hand, his silhouette sharp against the storm. For a moment he simply stood there, watching the diner. Then he raised his phone and snapped a photograph before getting back in. The car drove off without a sound. Sarah shivered. What was that about? James didn't answer. His jaw tightened, the easy charm draining from his face. You said your husband bought that locket from an antique store? Yes, years ago in Boston. Why? He met her eyes, something urgent flickering there. Because someone's been looking for it. Sarah felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Looking for it? Who? James hesitated, as if weighing how much to tell her. Let's just say it's connected to a part of my family history I thought was buried. Lightning flared again. And for a heartbeat, the diner felt smaller, its walls closing in around secrets that suddenly seemed alive. Sarah swallowed hard. What are you not telling me, Mr. Carson? He turned back toward her, his voice quiet but steady. That paying your debt might have been the easy part. The hard part. He glanced toward the window where the headlights had been. Is figuring out why someone doesn't want you or that necklace to exist at all. Outside, thunder rolled through the valley like the promise of a reckoning. The storm lingered through the night, steady and unrelenting, washing the world beyond Miller's diner into a blur of silver and shadow. The sign outside had gone dark, its flickering M finally giving out for good. Inside, the lantern's glow bathed everything in a soft amber haze. The counter, the empty booths, the faces of two people who should have been strangers but no longer felt like ones. Sarah sat across from James at the corner booth. Her hands curled around a mug that had long gone cold. The smell of rain mixed with the faint sweetness of cooling pie. Somewhere above them, the roof groaned softly as wind swept over it. She studied him carefully. This man who had dropped into her life like some improbable storm of his own. His coat was draped over the back of the seat, his shirt damp at the collar. Without the polish of his earlier composure, he looked almost humanly tired, eyes shadowed, a faint line between his brows as if he were always thinking one step ahead. You didn't have to stay, she said finally. I didn't plan to, he admitted, staring into his coffee. But after what we saw outside, I thought it best you weren't alone. She tried to smile, though it wavered. I've been alone a long time, Mr. Carson. I can handle it. I don't doubt that, he said quietly. But sometimes handling it isn't the same as being all right. That silenced her. From the counter, Lily had fallen asleep on a bench, her head resting on a folded apron. The old teddy bear clutched to her chest. The steady rise and fall of her breathing filled the quiet like a lullaby. She's brave, James said after a moment, nodding toward the child. She doesn't have much choice, Sarah replied softly. She thinks I'm stronger than I am. James's eyes flicked to hers, and for a moment neither looked away. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between them. When my father died, he said suddenly. My mother sold nearly everything we owned just to keep us afloat. I remember her hands shaking as she packed our house into boxes. But when I asked if we'd be okay, she smiled and said, "Of course, sweetheart. We always land on our feet." Sarah froze. "That's what I tell Lily," she whispered. He gave a rueful smile. Maybe it's what mothers have to say, no matter how scared they are. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire, the man whose last name could bend bankers to their knees, but someone who understood loss, the kind that doesn't show up in numbers or headlines. Lightning flashed and the diner windows shuttered. James turned to look outside, then back at her. "You really love this place, don't you?" "It's all I have left of them," she said simply. "My parents, Tom. Every good memory I've ever made is in these walls." She glanced around, her voice softening. "My dad used to say the diner had a heartbeat, that if you stood here long enough you could feel it." James nodded slowly. "Then maybe it deserves to keep beating." Sarah frowned. "You talk like you know what that means." He leaned back, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "I know what it's like to lose the thing that reminds you who you are." She studied him. "You talk like a man who's lost a lot." "I've gained more than I should have," he said quietly. "And somewhere in all of that I forgot how to feel like myself." The lantern flickered again, the flame dancing in the draft that crept under the door. For a moment the diner felt like it was floating in time, two lost souls suspended in the middle of nowhere, trying to remember how to believe in something again. "You said earlier someone's looking for that necklace," Sarah said at last. "Do you really think it means something?" James hesitated. "I think it meant something once. Maybe it still does. But whatever story it carries, it's yours now, Sarah. Not anyone else's." His tone made her chest tighten unexpectedly. She'd spent months fighting off pity, but this wasn't pity. It was understanding. "You don't even know me," she said. He met her gaze. "Maybe not yet." The wind howled again, and she looked away first. Minutes passed in silence. Lily shifted in her sleep, murmuring softly, and Sarah rose to drape her jacket over her daughter's shoulders. James watched her. How carefully she moved, how gently she brushed the hair from Lily's face. He had seen power in boardrooms and billion-dollar mergers, but nothing in his world carried the quiet power of that small gesture. When she sat back down, she looked suddenly small, like someone carrying too many ghosts. "You know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "when my husband died, people stopped coming around after the funeral. They didn't mean to vanish. They just didn't know what to say anymore. The only ones who did were the regulars, truckers, factory guys, the ones who came here every morning. They'd order coffee, say something dumb like, 'How's the weather?' But they stayed. This place stayed, until it couldn't." James listened without interrupting. "And now," she continued, "a stranger walks in and saves it. I don't even know if I should thank you or be terrified." He smiled faintly. "I'll take either, as long as you don't send me away just yet." Sarah looked down at the table, a reluctant laugh escaping her. "I can't decide if you're crazy or just kind." "Maybe both," he said, finishing his coffee. The storm began to ease. The lantern burned lower. James stood, reaching for his coat. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. "We'll talk about what comes next, for the diner and maybe for you and Lily." She hesitated, torn between gratitude and fear of hoping again. "You don't owe us anything." He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. "I know. That's why it matters." Then he stepped out into the rain, disappearing into the gray dawn. Sarah stood there for a long moment, the echo of his words hanging in the air. She looked down at the locket resting against her heart, its silver surface catching the faintest flicker of the lantern flame. She didn't know it yet, but James Carson hadn't just saved her diner that night. He had reopened a door to a past neither of them were ready to face, and to a future that would test the limits of faith, forgiveness, and love itself. The next morning came softly, not with sunlight, but with the thin gray light that follows a storm. The air outside was cool and washed clean, and the world felt quieter, as if the rain had hushed everything that had gone wrong. Sarah woke to the sound of clinking dishes downstairs. For one weightless second, she thought it was Tom, her husband, back in the kitchen whistling off-key as he always had. But when she blinked herself fully awake, the dream dissolved, leaving the ache of reality in its place. Pulling on her robe, she padded down the creaking stairs and stopped short. James Carson, the billionaire who had impossibly saved her diner from foreclosure less than 12 hours ago, stood behind the counter in rolled-up sleeves, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. His jacket hung neatly on the back of a chair. A box of pastries from the town bakery sat beside him, steam curling upward in the morning chill. "You're up early," she said cautiously. He smiled without turning. "Old habit. I don't sleep much." "I gathered that last night," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "You didn't have to come back." "I told you I would," he replied, finally meeting her eyes. "And besides, someone has to make sure the coffee here doesn't taste like engine oil." Sarah laughed, genuinely, the sound catching even her off guard. "You're not wrong." Lily came bounding in from the stairs, hair a wild halo of gold still clutching her bare. "You came back," she said brightly, as though greeting a long-lost friend. "I did," James said with mock gravity. "And I come bearing chocolate croissants, very official breakfast food." Lily's eyes widened. "Mommy never buys those. She says they're a luxury item," Sarah finished, crossing her arms. "We're a pancake family." James handed Lily a plate. "Consider this an upgrade." As Lily devoured the pastry, Sarah busied herself behind the counter, trying not to look too closely at James, at the way the morning light found his features softer, more human. She wasn't used to anyone stepping in, especially not men like him. Wealthy men didn't fix things. They bought them. But James seemed different, patient, grounded in a way that didn't match his reputation. He watched her move through the diner, noting how she ran her hand over the countertop, almost absently, as if to remind herself it was still hers. "I was thinking," he began carefully, "maybe we could start fresh. Reopen the diner, see what we can do to make it thrive again." She looked up sharply. "You mean together?" "I mean as partners," he said. "You know this place. I know how to build businesses. Between us, we might have a chance." Her eyes flicked toward Lily, who was humming softly to herself, completely unaware of the gravity of what was being discussed. "You don't even know why this place matters," she said softly. "You don't know what it costs to lose something like this." "I might know more than you think," he said, his voice low. "I lost something once too, something that couldn't be bought back." She studied him, really studied him, and saw the truth in his eyes, the exhaustion that no amount of money could cure. Then, like a thread being tugged loose, something in her chest gave way. "All right," she said at last, surprising even herself. "But on one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "No pity. No charity. If we rebuild, we do it right. On equal footing." James smiled, a small, genuine thing. "Deal." For the first time in years, the diner filled with laughter again. They spent the rest of the morning cleaning, repairing, dreaming. Sarah scrubbed the windows while James fixed the flickering neon sign outside. When he finally reconnected the wires and the old Miller's Diner sign blazed to life, Lily clapped her hands and squealed, "It's alive again!" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. Later, after Lily went upstairs for her afternoon nap, Sarah brewed fresh coffee and sat across from James in the quiet diner. The silence between them wasn't awkward now. It was easy, almost sacred. "You ever think about how you got here?" she asked. "Not this town, but this moment, the choices that led to it." James nodded slowly. "More than you'd think. Sometimes I feel like everything I built was just noise. Distractions from something I couldn't name. And then I came here, and for the first time in a long while, the noise stopped." Sarah smiled faintly. You're full of surprises, Mr. Carson. James, he corrected gently. If we're going to rebuild this place, you should probably call me James. Sarah, she said in return. He met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile, like glass, but real. That night after he left, Sarah sat alone at the counter with her coffee and the silver locket in her hand. The diner was quiet again, but no longer empty. She opened the locket, gazing at the faded photograph of her and Tom. I don't know what's happening, she whispered, but it feels like something's shifting. For a heartbeat, the reflection of the pendant shimmered in the chrome of the counter. Two intertwined initials barely visible beneath the tarnish. JC. She frowned, her pulse quickening. JC, the same initials as James Carson. The coffee went cold in her hands as the wind outside began to rise again. The morning light spilled into Miller's diner like liquid gold, glinting off the chrome edges of the counter. The storm had broken. For good, leaving behind a sky so clear it felt brand new. For the first time in months, Sarah woke without dread pressing against her chest. Lily's laughter drifted up from downstairs. Bright, easy, unburdened. It mingled with the rhythmic scrape of a chair and the soft hum of a man's voice. James was already there. Again. When she descended the stairs, she found him sitting at the counter, sleeves rolled up, sorting through a stack of old photographs and menus he'd unearthed from a storage box behind the register. He looked oddly at home, as though the diner had been waiting for him all along. Morning, she said, tying her apron. Morning, he replied, eyes warm. Hope you don't mind. I started organizing your archives. My what? He grinned. Your history. These photos deserve better than a dusty box. She leaned over his shoulder. Faded Polaroids from the 50s and 60s lay scattered like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Her grandparents standing beside the original jukebox. Her father flipping pancakes in his 20s. Her mother laughing behind a slice of pie. Then, near the bottom, one she'd never seen before. In it, a young man in a suit stood beside her grandfather at the grand opening ribbon cutting. The man's hand rested lightly on the diner's signpost, and the engraved plate beneath it read, Miller's Diner, sponsored by Carson Industries. Her breath caught. That's my grandfather, James finished softly. Richard Carson. I didn't know he ever came through Millfield. The two studied the photograph in silence. The resemblance between James and the young man was unmistakable. The same steady eyes, the same poised half-smile. I guess our families have crossed paths before, Sarah murmured. Looks that way. His tone was gentle, but there was a weight beneath it. Sarah's fingers instinctively went to the locket resting against her collarbone. She opened it again for the 100th time, but now, looking closely, she noticed what she'd missed before. Tiny, worn-away engraving on the inside edge of the clasp. RNC 1952, her throat tightened. RNC, she whispered. Richard Carson. James leaned closer, astonished. May I? She handed it over reluctantly. He turned it in the light, tracing the initials with his thumb. This was his work. My grandfather had these lockets made for his employees when his company first expanded. He said they represented continuity, something built to last through hard years. Then why did my husband have it? Sarah asked, voice trembling. James frowned, thinking, maybe it passed down. Maybe your husband inherited it from someone who worked for Carson Industries. Do you know his family history? She shook her head. Tom didn't talk much about his parents. He said his father left when he was little, and his mother, she died before we met. He didn't have anything from his past except this. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind lifted the scent of wet asphalt and early coffee. Finally, James said, What if it wasn't chance that I stopped here? Sarah managed a small, incredulous laugh. You think fate rerouted your car? Maybe. Or maybe this diner and you were the unfinished story my family forgot. She looked down at the photo again, at the two men smiling side by side half a century ago. The idea that their lives were somehow linked across generations sent a shiver through her. Not fear, something gentler, like recognition. You know, James continued, his voice low. My grandfather used to tell me a story when I was little, about a roadside cafe where he made a promise to an old friend before the company grew. He said he'd return one day to help rebuild it if times ever got hard. He never said where it was, but he called it the heart of the highway. Sarah blinked, stunned. That was the diner's old slogan. We used to have it painted on the front window before it faded away. They sat there, two descendants of a forgotten promise, and the realization hung between them. Fragile. Luminous Lily's voice broke the silence. "Mommy, Mr. James fixed the jukebox." The machine crackled to life and an old tune filled the room, soft and nostalgic. Sarah smiled through sudden tears. "Seems your diner remembers him too," James said. She wiped her eyes. Maybe it remembers both of them. He placed the locket back into her hand and closed her fingers gently around it. Then maybe it's time their promise gets kept. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel like she was clinging to the past. She felt like she was part of something still unfolding. The diner, the locket, the unexpected man beside her, threads weaving together, forming a new beginning out of old memories. Outside, sunlight caught the sign once more, Miller's Diner glowing steady in the morning breeze. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like the end of a story. It felt like the start of one. The morning of the reopening dawned bright and full of promise. A soft golden light spread across Main Street, glinting off shop windows that hadn't seen this much life in years. Bunting hung between lampposts. Handmade signs painted by local kids read, "Welcome back, Miller's Diner." And the air carried the rich smell of apple pie cooling in the open window. Sarah stood on the diner steps, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. She'd spent the last 2 weeks scrubbing, repainting, and reliving every memory embedded in the place. From the scuff marks on the linoleum where Lily had danced as a toddler, to the corner booth where Tom once proposed. She'd rebuilt it with her own hands, but this time she hadn't been alone. Inside, James was setting the last tables. He'd been there nearly every day, sanding down the counter, repairing the ancient espresso machine, and, most surprisingly, talking with the townspeople. The billionaire who once commanded glass towers and private jets now knew everyone in Millfield by name. He'd learned the art of small-town conversation where every story ends with laughter or pie. "Grand reopening in 15 minutes, he said, glancing at the clock as Sarah came in. "How are you holding up?" "Like a balloon," she said, smiling nervously. "Full of air and ready to burst," he grinned. "Then let's make sure it's a good kind of burst." Lily twirled around them in her new yellow dress, the locket shining against her chest. Sarah had given it to her that morning. "You keep it now," she'd told her daughter. "It's part of who we are and who helped us get here." The diner door jingled, and soon the first customers trickled in. The sheriff, the mail carrier, old Mrs. Hendricks from the flower shop, even Frank Dawson, the bank manager who could barely meet Sarah's eyes. "Welcome to Miller's Diner," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "We've missed you." The place filled fast. Conversations overlapped, laughter swelled, and for the first time in years the diner felt alive. Lily flitted between tables like a sunbeam, taking pretend orders on a notepad. James worked behind the counter beside Sarah, refilling cups and smiling in that quiet, content way that comes from finally belonging somewhere. When the rush slowed, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. "Yellowed with age. I found this yesterday," he said softly, hidden behind the photo frame we cleaned. "It's addressed to your grandfather and signed by mine." Sarah stared, her hands shaking slightly as she opened it. The paper crackled, fragile but perfectly legible. June 3rd, 1952. "Dear Walter, if this diner ever falls on hard times, promise me you'll let my family know. You gave me my start when I had nothing. A hot meal and a chance to design your sign when nobody else would hire a kid from the wrong side of town. I named my company Carson Industries because you told me I'd build something worth passing on. If the day comes when your family needs help, mine will be there. That's my word. Your friend always, Richard Carson." By the time she finished reading, tears blurred her vision. She pressed the letter to her heart, unable to speak. James looked down, his voice hushed. "I think my grandfather kept his word. It just took 70 years for the message to reach the right hands." Sarah laughed through her tears. "All this time I thought that locket was a love story. Turns out it was a promise between friends." "Maybe both," James said softly. The afternoon sun shifted, turning the chrome surfaces into mirrors of light. The jukebox hummed to life again, one of Lily's favorite songs playing faintly under the chatter of voices. Sarah looked around at her customers, her daughter, the man who had walked into her life on the day she'd lost everything, and realized the diner's heartbeat was stronger than ever. When the crowd began to thin, James stepped outside. Sarah followed, standing beside him on the steps as the town moved in golden light below. "Funny," she said quietly. "Your grandfather promised to return one day. Maybe you were just keeping that promise." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it was never about the promise at all. Maybe it was about finding the people who still believe in them." Sarah turned to him. "So what now, Mr. Carson?" "Now," he said with a smile. "I'm just James, and now I stay." Lily ran out onto the porch, spinning with her arms wide, the locket flashing in the sun. Sarah watched her daughter's laughter rise into the clear blue air, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the ache of what was lost, only gratitude for what had found its way back. The wind stirred, carrying with it the faint scent of apple pie and rain-washed roads. The sign above them flickered once, then steadied. Miller's Diner, the heart of the highway. And for everyone who passed that way again, it would remain just that, a place built on kindness, kept alive by love and bound forever by a simple promise that, against all odds, was finally kept.